Hey guys, welcome back to the Obi Thorin Alliance. What are we doing today, Jacob?
We are reviewing Season 1 of Only Murders in the Building on Disney+.
So stick around and see what we thought. So, Only Murders in the Building. There's currently 2 seasons out, a third on the way. You watched this before I did. I've only just recently finished it, so my telling of it's going to be based upon what I've recently seen. Yours, you got to think back a little bit. So let's try and summarize this together. So Only Murders in the Building is kind of following on from this podcast concept where, you know, a bunch of fans of a podcast live in the same apartment block. They become friends over this, whilst also a murder occurs in the building. They decide that they are going to try and use their expertise to try and not only solve the murder, but make a pod. Show stars Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. Each of them have their own unique skills. Steve Martin's character being an ex-actor from a detective show, Martin Short's character Oliver being a producer of musicals, and Selena Gomez is kind of mysterious. We don't quite know what her expertise are yet. So through that, they think that they can make a podcast and solve a murder at the same time, being able to have a director and a voice actor already part of their group, which is quite convenient. The show follows them trying to solve this murder, and we go on a few twists and turns. What are some of the things that we occur in the first season?
Well, with Season 1, there's a fire happens and then someone mysteriously gets murdered, and the 3 group members thinks it's a fun idea to start a podcast about it and try to solve who the killer is, because the police think it was a suicide. Yeah,
so they're suspicious of it from the get-go. Because they're obviously really into murder mystery, so they're looking at things from a different perspective, and the more they look into it, they realise that, you know what, they're right. This is not a suicide, actually, it's a murder. We go through a list of multiple suspects, and eventually it unwinds, and we find out a really strong motive as to why a certain person would have done it, and it gives us a backstory to a historical murder that happened in the building. Through that, we're very much led on that they're going to be the murderer, to only be kind of throw a spanner in the works and be thrown a different suspect towards the end. And then also the show opens up with Selena Gomez covered in blood holding on to someone that has died, and we don't know who it is, and it says that that happens several months later from where the show takes off. So we're already led to know that another murder occurs, and that's basically how the season ends, and now we're left with this cliffhanger of what's going to happen in Season 2 following this potential murder, with these people that have solved a murder now being arrested for a murder of their own. So moving into a verdict, what did you give this show?
I gave it an 81% out of 100. The acting is superb, high caliber trio. Really interesting take on the podcast. That's why I think is a great thing that it does. It tells you what they're thinking at the same time as we're basically the audience members watching this show. But the negative, I would have to say, is that the killer, who I picked it, Luke didn't, but from what the motive isn't as satisfying, but what makes up for it is that cliffhanger, and normally I don't like cliffhangers, but it's an absolute excellent way to end the show. Well, I've already seen Season 2, but I can guess Luke is already looking forward to watching it. Definitely recommend this show. I would say it's as good After Party and Truth Be Told and a lot of other murder mysteries, but I think the comedy and them trying to solve the crime is the best thing about the show. Yeah.
So I gave it the same, 81%. I gave it higher ratings and lower ratings in different categories than Jacob, but it evened out to be about the same. I think that the casting was its strongest point. The acting was great. It was quite fun. It wasn't too long. It didn't drag on. Motive for the murderer, kind of where it loses its most marks to me. I don't think it really makes a lot of sense. I do like that they kind of threw a spanner in the works. In terms of not picking the murderer, obviously everyone was a suspect, but until right at the end where they reveal why she killed, it would be impossible to with certainty say that is the person, have a motive. I guess if you just throw names at a dartboard, you're eventually going to guess who the murderer is, but I think they disguise it well, because the motive actually there's nothing that leads up to that to make you think that that person would have been the murderer. And then the reason they chose seems a bit out of whack. So I don't know if that's good writing or if that's just being cheeky. So you can't really, with confidence, have a reason to why someone was a murderer. Plus also sending you on this goose chase of another murderer and then having a previous murder. Again, I liked it, but whether that was good writing, I don't know. But I am looking forward to season 2, and I think the fact of the casting in it and the playful and funness of the show makes it worth watching for anyone that is into murder mysteries, because most haven't really had that comedy element besides the after party, so I'm starting to like this changeover. So looking forward to season 2. Moving into some spoilers, are there any topics or discussions you want to bring up?
Do you think it was just a lucky guess that I guess who the murderer was, or was I a genius?
Well, I guess to say you picked the murderer, you'd have to know why, how, and...
It was a lucky guess.
Yeah, so I guess unless you knew why she did it and how she did it, then yeah, I guess it's a guess.
I was just suspicious about her. I just thought, why would she want to date one of the main characters unless she wants information about them hunting her?
I definitely think when she came into it, I came suspicious of why did they introduce this new character.
Yeah.
If she was in it from the beginning, then that would have hit it really well. There would have been no reason to suspect her. But the fact that they waited to midway through the season to kind of throw a new character in and then her to become quite invested made it, well, it was either going to be one of two things. She was either going to be linked to the murderer or be the murderer, or she was going to be a new member of the gang, which is, they kind of made it seem that way. But I think by making the other characters besides Martin Sheen kind of not love her and think that she was a pain and getting in the way, kind of made you be pretty certain that she wasn't going to become a member of the gang. Where if she helped them solve the murders and was like really involved in a positive way, you'd go, oh, well, she's just going to be the 4th member of the podcast and they've added a love story, that's great. But yeah, if that's clever writing or poor writing, that they've kind of just chucked in an extra character and then given them a reason for them being the murderer. Well, it wasn't great, really. Like the fact that she was getting dumped by a much younger, but it seemed like the murder had been planned, so it doesn't quite add up either. But then maybe through season 2 we might find out a bit more about that. So based on season 1, her reason for becoming a murderer and then wanting to murder again and then possibly murder everyone in the building seemed, if you ask me. But it doesn't take away from how fun the show was. Yeah,
the fun aspect is definitely the best one. Where would you like season 2 to go?
Well, we're left with the murdering of I guess she's the head of the body corporate or the homeowner society within this building. I'm guessing maybe her being intertwined with it in some way, because she was very adamant about getting them kicked out of the building, not wanting them to be around. So maybe her being linked in and maybe going back to this whole jewellery business where we're left with the Greek guy that was funding their podcast. Because again, it doesn't really make sense why he was funding this podcast if he run the risk of them exposing his son being a murderer. So maybe a bit more about that. And I'm also curious, they call him tie-dye shirt in the tie-dye jumper or hoodie in the show, but he went to prison for 10 years for a murder that we now know he didn't commit. Is there some remuneration for that? You know, he's served time that he didn't need to, like he was accused and found guilty of a murder that he was later found that he didn't do. So I'd like to find out a bit more about that. I wouldn't say for a long time, but I thought early on that a suspect was maybe his dad, that if he did have something to do with the murder and the gentleman that got murdered that didn't tell the truth, whether the dad knew something about it and that's why he killed the guy and happened to be, coincide with his son coming out of prison. So that didn't plan out, but I think there could be a cool twist if you added that, opposed to just throwing in a random character and her motive was just as simple as, oh, we split up.
Why do you think we thought it was different people? Were you reading into, because I feel like they put people in like a Easter egg hunt. They made you go in one direction. Well, I feel like for myself, I thought, no, I was suspicious about it, and for me, that's what the writing was.
Well, I guess when I watch a murder mystery, I don't try and just guess who I think it's going to be. I like to try and find a reason as to why. So I guess I had no reason to suspect her except for the fact that she was a new character. She didn't seem like she'd be intertwined. I wasn't thinking that she's related or, you know, in a relationship with the deceased. There was really no reason to have any suspicion about her. As some of the other characters did, like the wealthy man, he obviously had reason, you know, he had the jewelry that he'd been looking for. He knew information about his son. You know, he had some motives. The tie-dye shirt, he had motive. Next door neighbour with the cat, all they had motives. She had no motive until it was eventually revealed her motive. So I guess there was no reason to suspect her. Yeah.
Do you think that was clever of me, or, like I said, just lucky?
Oh, I guess everyone, you can be suspicious of everyone. So I guess did you completely rule out every other suspect at that point and only consider her?
I only considered her when she was asking questions, and yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion points from this show?
I feel like if they didn't nail the cast and kind of their banter between each other, do you feel like the show wouldn't be as appealing? Because I feel like the plot is kind of the second focus, the first focus is more the characters. I feel like this is more of a character-driven show.
I think the cast is important. I think if you chucked in not already famous celebrities, like people that got their first gig, I don't think there'd be a reason to watch it. So I definitely think the star power gives people a reason to watch it, and then, you know, from there their chemistry gets people a reason to continue watching it. So I think that's very, very important to the show.
I remember you saying there was one thing that you didn't like about the show, how they didn't film all the episodes at once and release. There was kind of how they did it.
Oh, so did they were weekly releases of the show?
I mean, with the podcast, they released one episode and...
Oh, it's a bit questionable about how that would actually work, you know. Like, I imagine in podcast world, you know, you'd go investigate a murder or whatever you're investigating, do all your research, be certain that it's true, and then make a podcast later. But they were releasing it week by week, which to me seems you're opening yourself up to a lot of lawsuits, making accusations about accusing someone of being a murderer, and, you know, speaking poorly of them on a podcast. I think that's probably it's defamation. So that's the only thing I question. I think it's a bit unrealistic, but for the sake of the show, it's important. I still think that the show could have been pulled off without them releasing weekly episodes. I think their love for podcast and crime could have got them together. They could have done their research, and then at the end of solving it, then they release a podcast about their adventures, and then they celebrate, and then they get intertwined with another murder. I think that could still work. But I guess releasing the podcast weekly, the only thing it does is it gets the cop involved. It gets their fans involved that sit out the front, and that's really it. But I think it still could have worked if they just released at the end. Like, they could have been making a podcast, but then someone comes suspicious of them and kind of wants to kill them so that they don't release the podcast. But I guess the podcast coming out weekly gives a lot of reason for their threats and, you know, a lot of the story that comes out of it. So it's not how I think things would unfold, but it does make sense to the plot. So it's a catch-22 really.
Yeah. I definitely think this is worth watching if you are looking for a murder mystery or something to watch. Definitely is worth binging if you haven't got anything to watch.
Yeah, I think if you haven't seen our video already, we're releasing one about what makes a good murder mystery. And what I think this show has done actually well is they've made it make sense that they'd be intertwined in future murders and seasons, where I really don't like a murder mystery where murders keep occurring around a main character. They keep somehow getting tied up, and that drags on season after season. Where this, I feel like, without seeing it, the second season is going to be related to the events of the first. So it's still it's like a hangover or a carryover from the original murder, that there's more to it than what meets the eye. So that justifies the second season, opposed to simply, oh, we solve the murderer, oh, but we killed the murderer, and now we got to cover up our own murder, and, you know, someone's blackmailing us specifically. one of us is lying kind of follows that mantra. So I like that they've kind of given it reason and set up a second season. Well, they set it up from almost the first scene when she's holding another dead person. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think that does well, and I'm happy that that's being done. If they simply just solved the murder, went downstairs, and, oh, there's another person dead in our building, you go, well, that just can't keep happening. But I believe this. I think that they've done a good reason to justify a second season.
Definitely agree with that. Well, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, hit the notification bell, like and subscribe, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.